TikTok time to rock. How's everyone doing? Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to you all, wherever you are around the world, from the Philippines. I am your friendly neighborhood apologist, Carla Bad from the Fellowship League. And we just made our Facebook page, the Fellowship League. Please like, follow, and share our page because so far we have invited so many guests and we'll still invite more guests this coming days, speaking on different multiple topics. And our goal are three words: facts, cross, and fellowship. Wherein all the topics out there floating, any questions you have emotionally, spiritually, or intellectually, all of them find their foundation and their pillar in the cross of Jesus Christ via discourse and conversation. So right now, I'm here right now with another apologist, and this time even greater than me. Just joking. So our guest right now is an RZIM itinerant speaker based in Australia, and his name is Jordan Thayer. How are you, Jordan?
Hi, Carl. Great to be with you. Good to be speaking with you all.
All right. So, where are you now in Australia, Mr. Jordan Thayer?
Yeah, so I'm in Perth, which is in Western Australia. And so the best part of Australia for Filipinos because we're in the same time zone. No time difference. We're in sync. So I'm from the West Coast, so we often say West is best.
Oh,
So,
yes. Yeah, when I look at I have a globe here, actually. When I look at Australia, it's really a big country, one whole island, whole continent. And when I search for it in the Google, it's 2 hours ahead. And
It's what, sorry?
It's 2 hours ahead. So if it's 4:30 here right now in Australia, maybe in the east, it's like 6:30 there, if I'm right.
Yeah, that's right. In Sydney, it would be 6:30. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So because since you are in Perth, we're in the same time period. So so we're in the same 4:30 p.m. over there and over here, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right. So please for our dear viewers who are watching, Brother Jordan, what have you been doing lately? Is it okay if you introduce yourself? Let us know who you are and how did you involve in RZIM? You said it's a long journey. So how did you reach to that amazing finish line?
Well, yeah. It's a great ministry to partner with, that's for sure. I suppose my journey really began with RZIM when I was 18. I was a first year uni student. And I got to uni and I was confronted with the plethora of worldviews that were around me. Not so much that I thought that all worldviews were equally true, but more the question, why I think specifically that Christianity was true. Is that just my upbringing or cultural heritage or things like that? And so really did some digging and came across Ravi Zacharias, his podcast, YouTube, and books, and found them very helpful in more than just an intellectual sense. But I feel like Ravi really connected philosophy and theology with everyday life and showed how the person of Christ gives satisfying and credible answers for the big questions that we actually all ask. And so that probably started me out on a journey where I wanted to know God better as He's revealed Himself in scriptures, through His Spirit, and generally in creation. And so really started to take my faith seriously for myself, investigating it and doing some digging on some apologetics topics. Often apologetics, it's not about winning arguments. It's about, I think, graciously and reasonably giving the reasons for the trust that you have in God. And so I started doing some reading and was really impressed that the case for Christianity wasn't just wishful thinking, but there were really good reasons to think that it's true, that Jesus was the real deal, that Jesus was who He claimed to be, that He made sense of life, that theism wasn't just a philosophically bankrupt worldview, but it had something going for it. And so, I found hope in Christ, found forgiveness, especially in Christ, is something we all need. And so after I finished chemical engineering, I worked in engineering for a while. And while I was working as an engineer, I applied for the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics just to do a summer program. And when I applied, I got accepted, and I went to my engineering boss, line manager. I was working on an oil and gas project, the PNG LNG project. And so I went to him and said, look, can I have this period of 6 weeks off? to go and study this course in Oxford. And he said, no, he said, look, it's not a good time in the project. You can't have the time off. And so I thought, oh, that kind of puts a dampener on things. And so I delayed it. I deferred it a whole year. By the time the next year came around, I guess I'd been doing a lot more ministry and a lot more kind of public speaking or sharing of Christian faith and reasons to think it's good, good and true. And so I applied for the 1-year course, and I kind of just applied, not really that certain that I'd get in or not. I had okay grades from engineering, nothing to like, be super proud of. It's maybe not what your parents are going to tell their friends about at a dinner party. Like, I was a good student, but it wasn't insane. But I think they were looking for well-rounded candidates. And so I had maybe some good references and some extracurricular things. So amazingly, I got an acceptance offer. And I was wondering whether I should take this whole year thing because it would require me leaving my job behind. And I was actually mountain bike riding with a non-Christian mate of mine in the Perth Hills. And we were talking about this. And as we're riding along, I told him about this year to study in Oxford for a year. And he kind of stopped and looked over at me. He's like, of course you should do it. He's like, you love this God stuff. And that was kind of, this interesting source of, I guess, a bit of a wake-up moment for like, yeah, I do really love and care about this stuff. I think it brings hope to so many, and it's knowing Jesus is really the best way to live and the only way to die. And so, went and did that course, made some good friends over that year. RZAM was very encouraging in affirming some gifting and calling in speaking about the Christian faith. And so went back, wanted to do more study, did an MDiv while working as a youth minister. And now for the last kind of 3 or 4 years, I've been full-time in ministry, and now full-time with RZAM. So promoting the Christian faith to all who give it a hearing, and then answering people's questions. So that was maybe a lot longer response than you were after. So thanks for indulging me, Carl.
Yes, man. I mean, wow. So currently you're actually called for the youth. Right? You are a youth minister right now, right?
I was. Not anymore formally, but I still seem to informally do a lot of talks for youth. I think if you really understand something well, you ought to be able to understand it in a way that younger people can grasp it. And so, to be honest, I think any person involved in preaching or teaching should really give it a go doing kids and youth ministry, because part of understanding your position on something is to being able to articulate it in such a way that a younger person can make sense of what you're saying. I think that's a real litmus test for how well you understand your topic. So I love youth ministry because people are in that stage of life where they're figuring out who they are, what they believe, and why. And so, definitely something that I love investing in as opportunity arises.
Oh yes, and as I myself came from that youth organization called Elevate in our church, Christ Commission Fellowship, and so far in that youth, I've been in that youth service for a long time now, for many years, since 2015, and I've noticed so far the still questions coming in, simple as in questions like how can God be true, and how can I trust the Bible? I mean,
of course,
why is there so many multiple ideas out there? Why cannot just be one way? Why there are many ways to God?
Yeah,
very, very super question. And I came from that culture, those questions as well. That time where I had so many like doubtful questions about is God really loving, the character of God, and so on. And well, actually, it was also because of RZAM that helped me answer those questions, but not all, of course. Nobody's perfect, but I mean, it helped me answer the fundamental questions, the important questions that I really crave for answers.
Right, and I think that's a great point, Carl. Is that once you build a steady foundation, you can start to build on it, and there are fundamental questions that all of us have to ask in life. Who are we? What are we here for? What's the purpose of life? How do we deal with suffering? How do we deal with our own sinful proclivities, our wanting to do and then the right thing and then doing the wrong thing? And so I think I don't know a better explanation for our world and people than the Christian diagnosis and the Christian hope. So, yeah, it's something you can build on.
Yeah, yes. And so far it's very crucial right now, especially in this time, because it's the pandemic and it's COVID-19. Many people are
Right.
their loved ones are getting infected and they're dying because of this sickness, and of course doubts have crippled in and caused questions like, why would God allow this virus to kill my loved one, or
Yeah.
even the government, the corruption of the distribution of money, and political
Right. Well, I
economic.
can't really comment on that as far as the Philippines
Yeah.
go, because I'm
Oh
not
yeah.
aware of that situation. But I remember Ravi G saying a number of years ago that they did a survey on people globally, and they asked what was the number one problem facing the world. I think it was in a political sense, and the response was corruption. So it's certainly not something that people feel to be unique to any one country. There does seem to be a inclination that happens to people in power to distort the facts or the narrative in order to maintain their position or something. So
Oh yeah.
yeah.
So it's yeah, you gotta that's a good point from Ravi G on the idea of corruption. Yeah, that's really the number one so far. That's based on survey,
Mm.
by the way, right? It's based on survey.
Yeah, I can't remember what year it was, but yeah, the consensus was that it was something that majority of people felt was the primary problem they were facing at that point in time. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a challenge for the church nowadays to keep
Mm.
praying, to continue to pray for our country, for the church itself, and also to remain strong with their faith. No, I mean not only
Mm.
spiritually, not only focus on the love, on the feelings, but also on the head also. So it's like a balance
Right.
of both truth and love. That's required
Right.
in the church nowadays. Because
Right.
I remember Ravi G said that also, that we are in the post-truth generation, right? And yeah.
Right. It's kind of the was it in 2017? Was it the word of the year was post truth? Yeah. So my colleague Abdu Murray has written a great book on this very topic.
Wow, and
Yeah.
wow. I mean,
I think it's
that's
called
and
Saving Truth.
yes, I think I remember that, saving truth. And by the way, Abdul Murray spoke in our church one time. I think that was
Oh, great.
2 years ago. I think that was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I don't remember, but he spoke one time
Right.
on that book, Saving Truth. Actually, if I
Yeah.
and once again, oh wait, so you're a youth pastor, because we've prepared one question on what can you say about our young
Go
generation
for it.
right now, which we'll do later after we discuss the Christianity and science. And by the way, for the
Sure.
viewers, this new week, we are now in the new series. If last week we focused more on testimony sharing and lives being transformed, right now we're going back to the intellectual side again. So more on theology in general, like what's Christianity have to do with this? How can Christianity help me? I mean, how can Christianity be true in this field? Where does Christianity fit in this topic? So right now because our guest is more on came from the engineering side, so it's more on scientific and also philosophical a little bit. Maybe we can grasp that also from this. Maybe we can bring that into the orb of this discussion here along the way. So
Sure.
we shall proceed now to the questions. Brother Jordan, you have anything to add there, or are you ready for
No,
it?
no, that's good. Fire away.
Far away. All right. So the first question there was, uh, what was your view of science before you knew Christ? Were you an atheist before? I'm sure you used to be skeptical before, right? You had many questions along the journey when you said you were working when you were taking up OCCA and as a chemical engineer. So, what was your view before,
Sure.
brother?
Well, I mean, certainly in Australia, the culture is post-Christian in attitude and often pre-Christian in understanding. So I think there's a skepticism that's kind of the air we breathe right now. The philosopher Charles Taylor, in his book, A Secular Age, talks about the fact that many of us now in the West live with a default worldview now of secularism, that kind of this world is all that there is, that the material universe is kind of reality, as it were. And so we don't really consider anything outside of that little frame. But in reality, I didn't grow up as an atheist. I think maybe you could say at best, we're all born in one sense agnostic. We're all unsure about what we believe about God and why. But I think the redefinition of atheism to mean a lack of belief in God is a little bit disingenuous. Atheism classically means a philosophical statement that there is no God. And so in that sense, that's a position that people would arrive at rather independently rather than a default position. And so I think I grew up believing that there was a God, largely because my worldview is informed and shaped by the family I belong to. But like all of us, we have to then examine our worldviews to see if it has good explanatory power for the reality we observe around us. And it has to be subject to scrutiny, questioning, and demands for evidence. And so I think I was persuaded emotionally and experientially that Christianity was good and right. I believed it was true, but I don't know if I got there through reason or rationality as much as through intuition. So when I actually took the lid off to examine it, I found that actually there were good reasons to believe and not just wishful thinking. So I think living in a culture that's by default quite secular and skeptical, examining my faith and my worldview, it was an uncomfortable thing, but it didn't feel like I didn't have the permission to do it. And my parents invited that, and my friends and people I spoke to, and even the church I went to allowed for that. So I definitely felt like I had a good degree of freedom to examine what I believed and why. Yeah.
I got mute there. Sorry, and mute.
That's fun. No worries.
So how did you how was that idea? How was that view shaped the moment you knew Christ? What was how important like you got deeper into science and you got deeper into Christianity as well. So how did it save you? How did it help you understand science?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a phrase that Ravi G says that kind of encapsulates this idea that he says, what I believe in my heart must make sense in my mind. And so because Christianity doesn't just claim to be a good way to live or claim to be the best way to deal with your shortcomings or to have hope in a deteriorating universe, it actually claims to be true. If it claims to be true, then it's not afraid of your questions. And Jesus himself claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life. So in that sense, I always felt like there was a permission to examine the Christian worldview. And so, yeah, I think that coming to know Christ is never a commission to leave your brain at the door and to stop thinking. In fact, it's part of your response to God's kindness is that we love God with our heart, soul, and Jesus included the word mind and strength. So when the Hebrews used the word heart, it implicitly included the mind, whereas when Jesus explicitly addresses it in the Greek, in the New Testament, it includes the word mind. So in one sense, there's really no such thing as a thinking faith, in that all of us are invited as part of our worship to respond to God in love by thinking it through. So, I felt like knowing Christ gave a real permission to try and make sense of our natural world through all the resources we had, scientific method, etc., but also God gave a fuller explanation of why things were the way they were, rather than just describing the mechanics or the what. So I hope that someone answers the question. Hopefully I didn't get too technical there.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, science always answers the question of what and how, but science cannot give you the question of why, right? Like
right, yeah, there's limits to science, and yeah, it attempts to answer the question of what and how, but theories do change and evolve over time. So we have our best explanations at different points in time, but theories do change and adapt, and they get refined. So in one sense, you got to appreciate what science is and what it does, and also have a bit of a awareness of its limits, I think, in order to fully respect and make the most of it.
A little bit segue a little bit, sir. right now we're in the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, right? And so far, many people have been so into science, wherein they try to, mix these chemicals together to make a vaccine, and they
Right.
try to study the virus. And you have any insights on that? Like, how can does it yes, it benefits society. It contributes to human flourishing. It makes us better. But does it require something? Does it only stay there? I mean, do you have any insights on that, brother?
Maybe some preliminary thoughts. I don't have much to add by way of technical thinking, but I would say that on the Christian worldview at least, thanks to God's common grace in creation that is accessible to all people, studying the world and making sense of it is available to all of us. And so in that sense, it's not a uniquely Christian discipline. All of us have the framework within which to do good natural sciences. I don't think there's inherently anything unspiritual about wanting to use the resources God's given us to look after ourselves and look after others. I think the dimension that is important is to appreciate that there are many things actually that go beyond our ability to control and to engineer and to manufacture. So in one sense, we have to have a bit of humility with, we do the best that we can, but we realize that we're all still quite vulnerable to our environment and also to what others do and how they behave. And so in one sense, I think that we should, sometimes people say, I remember John Lennox saying at a class when I was taking some courses from him in Oxford, he said that the common position is that we need to trust reason and use God. But actually, a more faithful way of looking at it scripturally is that we need to trust God and use our reason. So reason is a faculty, an ability, a capacity that we have. And faith is more a relational concept. Faith is not just believing things you have no evidence for. That's blind faith, and it's never something that the scriptures encourage. Rather, faith is a trust that you would exhibit based on good reasons. And so, yeah, I think we need to work hard to use medicine well for the good of others and responsibly, but also know that, a vaccine to the coronavirus doesn't solve all our problems in this world. There's lots of other things that we face. And so I would love there to be a vaccine for the coronavirus soon. But I don't put my hope in a vaccine for the coronavirus. I put my hope in God, and I would certainly use a vaccine if it became available and it was safe to do so.
Oh, that was a brilliant answer there, brother Jordan. There, man. Michael Jordan. Oh no, sorry, brother Jordan. So, this
That's all right. No, there's no last dance around here.
Oh,
as an Australian,
man.
I've got I hope you're impressed by my cricket trophies. I have to somehow try and have some credibility, although they are kind of undermined by the fact that they're from under 12. So I was a good athlete as a kid, but it stopped at that point. But unfortunately not that great at basketball, but love cricket. So
like Ravi G, he's also into cricket, right?
There we go. Yeah,
there we go. All right. Yep. And wait, you cited John Lennox there, and who is he? Is he triple doctorate?
Yeah, John Lennox is a mathematician, professor of mathematics at Oxford University, a philosopher of science. He has 3 PhDs. He speaks like 7 languages. He took some classes from C.S. Lewis when he was an undergraduate at Cambridge. So he's
C.S.
actually
Lewis himself. C.S. Lewis
himself. That's exactly right. Yep. One little known fun fact about John Lennox was when he was an undergraduate at Cambridge, Lewis was still lecturing there. And so he used to, as he would say, when the maths got boring, he'd sneak over to hear Lewis. And so, yeah, he got to hear him a few times. And so John Lennox I found profoundly helpful in understanding the nature of science, the philosophy of science, what it can and can't do, its uses, its limits. And so, I've found him to be not only a helpful source of information and organizing these topics and ideas, but also a really amazing example of using his gifts and abilities to serve Christ in whatever discipline. So he's had a few, well-known debates with Richard Dawkins. You could find them on YouTube.
Yeah.
I actually had a few friends in Oxford when I was studying there who had seen those debates and actually later became Christians after seeing those debates because they were persuaded by Lennox's presentation. And so, no one's time would be wasted if you went and watched YouTube videos or read books by John Lennox. I, highly recommend.
Yeah. Is it okay, Sir Jordan, if you would name the books that you would recommend to the church?
I know this wasn't at all pre-planned.
Yeah.
You want something a bit more technical? No, it wasn't. It's funny. It's this is his book, God's Undertaker: Has Science Buried God? It's pretty in depth. It's good. Covers a wide range of topics. He's also got another book called Gunning for God: How the New Atheists Are Missing the Mark. That's also a really good book. I don't have my copy here with me. It's in another bookshelf. He's got a book on Genesis and the days of creation called 7 Days That Divide the World. That's a pretty helpful little introduction analysis. One of his most recent books is in the new Oxford Apologetics series, Can Science Explain Everything? That's a really good little book as well. I'm just working my way through that. And he's also got some books on God and Stephen Hawking. There's plenty. You can spend lots of time reading stuff by Lennox. So
you have a whole shelf of books there, bro.
Yeah.
It's good, man. Yeah. Yes. You please. For those who are viewing this, please consider those books that our dear brother Jordan here just recommended for you, and please continue to join us and stay tuned with us in this again Fellowship League. Please like and follow our page. This is really awesome. By the way, I'm gonna tag this video to Jordan here, brother Jordan here. Hopefully, more and more followers will come and lots of valuable information here, not only in science but also in life lessons. How would you find meaning in a simple life struggle, or in also in various topics on the Bible contradictions and so on. So we're just starting. This is the first question. So we shall. All right. So next question is just I think simple. So with all of those things that you mentioned there, brother Jordan, is science are science and God at war against each other?
I'd say certainly not. If you're committed to more than just a cursory examination of the disciplines, it's pretty obvious to me that actually science and God are not competing explanations for our world, but rather that they do different things. So science and God are not attempting to be explanations for the same kind of phenomena. And even people try and use science to either prove or disprove God. It's really outside the realm of science. Science, by and large, is examining our natural and material world. And by that definition alone, God is outside the scope of science since it's a non-material being. So already we need to be clear on our categories and understanding what science can and can't do, its limitations, the philosophical assumptions which undergird it, things like that will help us, rather than just invoke a God of the gaps approach, which thinks, well, I don't understand how it works, therefore God did it. Rather, we use science to understand the mechanism, and then God gives a powerful complementary explanation for the agency behind it. So there's lots of ways you could justify this, but there's three main ways that are worth thinking about to understand the whole God and science relationship. One is the very history of science itself. And then two is the philosophy of science, the philosophical assumptions that undergird science that you need to hold in order to do science whatsoever. And then the third is the limits of science. So I'd say this about the history of science is that, interestingly, it was the theistic worldview that was a motor that actually got science going in history. So it's already problematic to try and assert that God and science are at war, because some of the earliest and best scientists we had Kepler and Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton, they were people who believed in God. And so their belief in God wasn't something that hindered scientific inquiry. It was actually something that got it going for them, because they believed, and this is the second point, that the universe was rational, intelligible, and accessible, that it had been established by certain laws. And every apologetics talk needs to quote C.S. Lewis in one way or another, and so I better get that out of the way early. C.S. Lewis says men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. So far from the belief in God hindering science, it was actually a foundation that got it going. And so the second thing is that the philosophical assumptions that you need to hold in order to do science are in the accessibility of the universe to our minds, also in the uniformity of natural laws. These are assumptions that you cannot prove by the scientific method. They are things that you simply need to assume and use in order to do science at all. And so the belief in a single God, a mind, a rationale behind the universe is actually, it's consistent with the sense that our universe is orderly. It's not just chaotic. Our universe can be studied because we've been made as God's image bearers with minds that can make sense of reality. And so the very philosophy of science is very well undergirded by theistic beliefs, that we see deep order and rationality in our universe. And Christianity wants to say, yeah, below that, there's standing behind that is an even greater reason for that. There's a cause of that reason and rationality that is in the very mind of God himself. And so the history of science would say God and science aren't in competition. The philosophy of science is very well supported by assumptions that the theistic worldview, belief in God, would provide you with. And then thirdly, the limits of science. So science limits to answer the questions of a child, like, what am I here for? What's the point of life? Where do we go when we die? They're not nonsensical questions because they're not scientific questions. They're important questions. They just go beyond the limits of science. And so science can't really prove for you mathematical truths. It can't tell you moral truths. It can't tell you aesthetic truths about beauty and ugliness and things like that. And so, but all of these things are rational to hold. So maybe that's a longer answer than you're expecting. But I would say, yeah, it's pretty clear to me that God and science, far from being in competition, are actually complementary. And so the analogy that I think best explains this, and this is given by John Lennox, is that he said, when he found out how the motor car worked, he didn't think to himself, oh, this is great, I don't need Henry Ford. He thought, oh, well, actually, understanding the laws of internal combustion and mechanical engineering that goes into making an engine work, it gives you an even greater appreciation and respect for the designer behind it. And so for me to say you need to choose between either the laws of internal combustion or Henry Ford as an explanation, you would say, well, actually, you don't need to choose between them. They go together. And so I think in many ways, agency and mechanism give a fuller explanation of our world and reality than simply mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very, very good illustration there that you just gave in the last part. You said the internal combustion and Henry Ford.
Right.
That's actually a funny illustration, though. Like as if like the law of internal combustion made that car, but it's actually it is the person itself. There's a mind behind that car, who constructed that car and allowed law of internal combustion. That's why I remember what John Lennox said, that the laws of science don't make anything.
Right.
It is part of reality.
Right. Yes, they
Right?
describe and they explain they explain behavior, but they're not a creative force in that sense. Yeah, he addresses this in his little book God and Stephen Hawking.
Yes. I've not read that book yet. Maybe I'm far better than. No, just joking. but it's actually it's actually a brilliant it's those are brilliant books actually recommended, and I believe the young generation should dig into that. I mean, especially in this time of we will never know of uncertainty. I mean, we don't know when we're like you said the limits of science. We don't know when we're gonna die. We don't know. We can't predict the future. Science cannot do that. Well,
Right.
it can predict the weather. Yeah, like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can live on probabilities, I suppose. We can say, well, it's improbable that I will die tomorrow, and in one sense that's true. But yeah, I think human beings seem to be creatures that live on more than just probability theory. We live according to hopes and dreams and the search for purpose and meaning and dealing with suffering and dealing with guilt and shame, and we're pretty complex creatures in that regard. And so yeah, I think that living as though this material world is all that there is, it's a little bit reductionistic. It's a bit bleak. I don't think it really properly explains our world and our human desires. So for me to say that you need to choose between God and science, another analogy is to say you need to choose between the architect who designed a house and the tradesman who built it. You kind of be going, well, you're trying to tell me to choose between things that aren't meant to be put against one another. They're actually things that together give a better explanation. The mind behind it, the agency behind it, and then the mechanism, the physical agent involved in making that happen. So yeah, I think that you get a fuller picture of life and human nature when you have God as part of the picture.
Yeah. Well, the first part there was you said it. You had a great explanation there, but it was too deep, but it's a good thing you simplified it with that analogy with the architect and the mind. Wow. I
Yep.
mean, wow. I mean, you're one of those deep thinkers. People would listen to you and say, "What?"
Yeah. So hopefully the analogy helps it make sense. So
Yeah.
remember Henry Ford and the internal combustion engine and architects and tradesmen, and you'll make sense of some of it. So
Yeah, I mean, brilliant explanation. So that was three ways to view science. We have the historical
Mhm.
side. We have the philosophical and the limitations of science. Now,
Yep.
for the next question, it's actually more historical now. So it's like
Great.
and more of like your more opinionated in your case, because the question here is in your academic journey. So it's more on
Mhm.
scholarship now. More in a little bit here. So yeah. So in your academic journey, what made you convinced that science proves God? And historically speaking, how Christianity impacted science throughout the historical development since the time of Christ? So I believe, because I've heard that all fields of human science, I mean, just in a nutshell, in simple terms, I mean, in all fields of science like physics, genetics, chemistry, they're all started by Christians, they say. And Jim Warner Wallace would concede, even David Wood would concede that, and also John Lennox, I believe, would also concede that. So, for our viewers,
They're not conceding it because
yeah,
that's
yes, you're conceding.
they're facts that support their position. So they would posit that. But yeah, the father of modern chemistry. Uh, it's either Boyle or Bacon. I'm a bit hazy on it at the moment. Is a Christian. So yeah, in many ways the scientific method of hypothesis and then testing and then review, this was something that was largely carried out by Christians. Some people want to attribute that to the Enlightenment, but really, if you look at the people who were the fathers of modern science and really got this enterprise going, they, in their own words, would say that it was undergirded and even promoted by their belief in God and the rationale of the universe. So the very history of science gives a powerful case for Christians being involved in the scientific method and that worldview supporting making sense of our world. I mean, Psalm 19 is pretty clear that it talks about God as someone who has done his works in creation that speak and reveal his reality in our world. So I suppose myself in my own academic journey, there were certain things that really stood out to me as making more sense in a theistic worldview and the belief that there was a God. Particularly chemical engineering is dealing with energy systems. How do you get from raw materials to refined products? And so particularly the first and second law of thermodynamics is quite I think a powerful piece of evidence in something like the cosmological argument for demonstrating that it's reasonable to believe that the beginning of our universe was by a powerful immaterial
Brother
being.
Jordan, what is the cosmological argument?
It's a good question. Yeah. So the cosmological argument is basically arguing for the existence of a God, not necessarily the Christian God, but a God. So it can work for Muslims, Jews, Christians, on the basis of why there is something rather than nothing. So it's basically saying that the universe exists is a argument for the existence of a non-material being like God. So the Kalam cosmological argument is a version of a cosmological argument which would say everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And it would then say, theists would use it to say, well, that God is the best explanation as that cause because he himself is not part of the universe but stands outside of it. So, yeah, I'm not sure how technical you want me to go or not, but I would say that the second law of thermodynamics says that things in a closed system without outside input tends towards entropy or disorder, which means that the amount of usable energy runs out. But since we have usable energy in our universe now, that's strong reason to suspect that our universe is not actually eternal, that actually it had a beginning at some point in the finite past, because otherwise we would have run out of usable energy by now if we had an infinite amount of time in the past. So that's a scientific inference for the universe needing some kind of cause or some kind of input at the start that gave it usable energy. So again, it's not a God of the gaps approach, because the God of the gaps would say, well, I don't understand it, therefore God did it. But rather, this is using what we do know to say that God is a good explanation for it. So it's not an argument from ignorance, it's an argument from evidence. So I don't want to go into too much detail because it might bore people, but I would say I don't think science either proves or disproves God. But what science can do is give you good evidence to believe that God does exist. But then ultimately coming to know God for yourself is not just a matter of the evidence, but it's also a matter of the will. Because we are spiritual creatures and we're by nature hostile to God, there is a sense in which actually we're not just brains that examine evidence. We're also embodied people, heart, soul, mind. We are very complex, and so there's an element with which we need to examine things thinking, am I willing for this to be true, or am I trying to explain the evidence in such a way that would remove the possibility of there being a God? So I think that science, it seems to be used by people both to argue for and against God. And so while I do think science does support belief in God, and especially the Christian worldview, it really doesn't prove things for you 100% one way or the other.
Yeah. There's somehow like a clarification of terms there. For example, theism and Christianity. When you say theism, it doesn't always mean the Christian God. Right? It could be just generally God.
Sure. It means, one God. There is a creator-creature distinction. Yeah. So that God is not part of creation, not part of the universe, stands outside of it. So it is different in that regard. But it is something that, again, if I do a talk on God and science, and I have done at universities, I've usually had Muslim students want to chat to me afterwards and say how much they agreed with it. And so a cosmological argument doesn't necessarily get you to faith in Jesus Christ for personal salvation and things like that. It's more of a it's an intellectual undergirding
Yeah.
of belief in God in general.
Yeah, it's super duper intellectual there, brother Jordan. I mean, really super duper. I mean, just for the sake
Okay,
of the
sorry.
no, I mean, I mean,
I'll simplify.
it's just for the sake of the viewers. That's why I asked like, what is cosmological argument? What do you mean by theism? And so what we're doing here, guys, is just not just focusing on the Christian God. So it's like talking about God in general as well. That there has to be a possibility of it. Yeah, so there's a possibility of that there's a God from
Right.
science. And brother Jordan, uh, 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 partially part of the question on the science proof God. Is it okay if you give just a nutshell, like where was science and Christianity? What was Christianity and science doing throughout the centuries? Like just
Oof.
if it's okay with you, bro. I mean, sorry. I mean, in a like nutshell, like from
Yeah,
Copernicus, Galileo. Then
sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the Galileo controversy is far more complicated than how it's often retold now. It makes out that Galileo was this objective scientist who stood up to the corrupt church who was anti-scientific, when in reality, Galileo was a complex character, but he was also a
yeah,
Catholic himself.
I've heard like he's had a weird like attitude, right? Like you don't know
Well, yeah,
which
look, I
side
don't
he
know his
took.
attitude very well. There is some reports that he was pretty argumentative, but regardless of the fact, he was standing on good ground, arguing, that the Earth, the Earth orbited the sun rather than, the everything else orbiting the Earth. So he was a Catholic himself, and there were often tribes within Catholicism competing with each other for political one-upmanship. It wasn't necessarily that it was the church as a whole was anti-scientific, but also the church was just by and large Aristotelian. I mean, they just bought into prior scientific ways of understanding the universe. So that's, again, the question does tend towards being complicated. So there's a really good podcast episode on this very thing done by an Australian historian called John Dixon that was just released a day or two ago. And it's an interview that he did with professor of science and religion from Oxford University, Alistair McGrath. And it's a good episode if people want to follow that further to understand the Galileo thing. But actually, the world expert on the Galileo affair historically is probably a philosopher of science or a science historian, I think, called Peter Harrison from University of Queensland. So he's an Aussie. But let me just summarize what we just talked about, Carl, because you asked for something simple, so I'll say it. Rather than God and science historically having been in competition with each other, belief in God was something that actually gave the necessary assumptions for people to do science. Because when people believed in God, they believed that the universe was orderly and accessible to their minds, and therefore they believed that you could study it and make sense of reality. And so, belief in God should never be put in competition with science. Now, you can argue of the positions you hold scientifically, but that's not really something that belief in God does, because the Bible's not given to us as a science textbook. It does tell us some things about the natural world, but its intention is not. Galileo, I think, used to say, the Bible is not written to tell us how the heavens go. It's written to tell us how to go to heaven.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who said that, right? In front of the.
I don't think it was deGrasse Tyson.
I know. I think I watched. I remember I watched that like Q&A stuff. Like he replied.
Okay.
He used it like I'm not sure. He took it out of context somewhere, and then
Possibly.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll follow that up.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe the recommended sources that by the way, John Dixon is one of my favorite historians. So
brilliant.
He's a great guy. I mean, on the what's the title of the podcast again, Brother Jordan?
His podcasts are called Undeceptions, and it's a brilliant podcast.
Is it free in YouTube or website?
Yep, free on just Apple Podcast Store. I think there's some Android equivalent. So Undeceptions, John Dixon, lots of good stuff on there.
Okay. And in addition, with regards to arguments, if you want to make it too intellectual, you can go to William Lane Craig, right? Reasonable Faith. He offers that argument. Besides, by the way, it was William Lane Craig, right, who somehow developed and made it known the Kalam cosmological argument.
He popularized it. Yeah, it was part of his PhD thesis. Developed that, and then he published on it.
Yeah. So, by the way, William Lane Craig is one of the greatest Christian philosophers out there, man. Imagine, I think he just went beyond his intelligence.
What? I don't know about that, but so what's the next question about the next generation?
Last question on the scientific part. I just want to hear on your thoughts on what is natural theology. If you have something there, if I'm right historically, before science there was ever a word science, it was called natural theology. If I'm right, or natural science. I'm not sure what you called that before. So is there something inside there you can that we can get something at least to motivate the viewers to dig deeper, or discover what is God out there,
Sure. Well, look, I'd be willing to go as far as saying that natural theology as an enterprise, it can tell you only so much. Natural theology can tell you, Romans 1 says that there should be enough of God's fingerprints, enough evidence for God in our natural world that tells us that there is a God, tells us that there is a God, that he's powerful, and that we are morally accountable to him in some sense. But there are limits to natural theology. So in one sense, these are things that are accessible to all people at all places and all times. It's not something you need special revelation for. So natural theology has limits. I would put it like this. Natural theology could tell you that there is a God, but special revelation through Christ tells you how you know the one true God. So natural theology has value, but it also has its limits. And in many ways, most people don't end up getting all that persuaded by your perspective on natural theology, because Romans 1 even says that, the way that we make up our minds on things, again, that our minds can be darkened by our desires. So we're not actually all that objective when it comes to studying our natural world. So natural theology is valuable. It can tell you that there is a God, that he's powerful, that there's some kind of moral law within. The vastness of the universe maybe tells us something about our size and in relation to the scope of things, but it has its limits, I'd say.
Okay, and I believe we the Fellowship League have discussed that as a part of our group discourse back in session 2, and we had a group discourse actually, by Jordan, on the existence of God. It's the same 40 minutes. We just for the sake of the viewers out there, the proponents of natural theology are famously Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, but in terms of origins, where it came from really is from the Bible, wherein we have Apostle Paul, who wrote Romans 1, that says from nature we see God's attributes, and his divine nature is clearly seen in the things that we see in creation.
And even further back in the Psalms, actually, particularly Psalm 19. Talking about
Psalm 19, the heavens
declare. That's right.
Glory of God. Amen on that. Yeah. So we can. It's amazing how even the Bible clearly says that we are of no excuse to say that there is no God just by looking at creation. I mean, it has to have a cause, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so just like what we said earlier, we have questions. Actually, this is the last question. We have a question for Sir Jordan on his advice for the church. So, his next question there. Next question here is, what are your thoughts on our generation today, Brother Jordan? And what do you suggest the church should do to reach out the Generation Z? Well, that's the generation we are right now. So in my case, I'm not sure where exactly is where you set the line there, but I'm not sure. I think I'm part of Gen Z. I think I'm.
Is it year 2000?
Yes, it's 2000. I was born in the year 2000. Yeah, I think I'm part of
There
Gen
you
Z.
go.
People call me millennial, so I'm not sure why, but
No, I
maybe
think
it's my
millennials
mustache.
before that.
Maybe it's my mustache. Maybe I need to.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. They think you're older.
Yeah.
Look, here's what I'd say. What's essential and to reach Gen Z? It's absolutely the gospel. It's the word of Christ about the work and worth of Christ. So, the shorter summary that we have of the gospel in the New Testament is 2 words in Greek, 3 words in English: Jesus is Lord. And that really encapsulates 2 main ideas as far as the gospel is concerned that are really essential. Simply the name Jesus means, Yahweh saves, that God will save his people from their sins, Matthew 1 says. So there's a salvation component to the gospel that's important and needs to be emphasized. And then there's the lordship of Christ as a fulfillment of Old Testament promises and prophecy and expectations, and also promises of what God will do through his reign in Christ. And so we need to be clear on the gospel for any generation, why we need Christ, what he does, what he offers, how we're made by God and for God to know God. So we need to be clear on the gospel. And then we need to be gentle and compassionate and gracious in answering people's questions. Because anytime you speak about something, people are going to reasonably have questions or objections. And with gentleness and respect, with grace and truth, we need to be willing to engage with them and to help people see why this is true and it's good and it's not just wishful thinking. And so providing evidence is really important. And the kind of evidence we have in Scripture is testimony of God speaking through people, as is claimed. It's something that you may not believe propositionally, but it's something you may come to believe experientially through experiencing it, through reading the Bible, through getting to see Christ yourself. But also the thing that really applies all of this and that helps us know Christ for ourselves is the work of the Spirit. And so, we believe that the Spirit does this illuminating work to help us know and see and respond. And so I'd say for any generation, you have to be clear on the gospel and you have to make sure that people understand the words you're using. If you use words like sin, salvation, redemption, ransom, justification, glorification, propitiation, expiation, they are all amazing theological words. But for many people, they don't actually understand what they mean unless you explain them. And so often Jesus uses stories to communicate parts of the gospel. There's language used in the New Testament that talks about us being washed or cleansed. They're terms that people get. I mean, you could use the theological term expiation, or you could talk about us being washed or cleansed from sin. And you're trying to communicate the same truths, but use language that people can understand. So the way that you do this is by getting to know the people you're speaking to. Know where they're at, where their thinking's at, where their understanding's at. And I'm not sure about the group that we're speaking to now. Maybe I should have asked you more, Carl, early on to see how old they are and what level of understanding they have. But it's important that you know your audience, you know the gospel, and you know that people are worthy to be loved and respected and treated with care and gentleness.
Yes, brother. I remember Ravi G summarized like going back to what we said earlier about the post-truth era, wherein now we're now in the generation wherein it is the generation that only thinks with its feelings. So
Right.
right. That's what he said, right?
Yeah, he does say that. Yeah.
He does say that. Yeah. I mean, I just so that's really reality. That's where we are right now, and we have placed feelings over logic, over facts, over explanation, over we have placed so much feelings in relationships and focus so much on I feel offended and political correctness
Sure.
in this side. So how
And
can
the solution isn't to say, I don't think the solution is to say that
sorry.
feelings are nothing or that they're unimportant, because we're all very emotional creatures and we're actually more intuitively inclined towards belief systems and values than we are merely rationally inclined. So, Aristotle used to make the point that, there was the the pathos and the logos, and I can't remember all the terms he used to
The
use, but
ethos, I think.
basically,
Pathos,
that's right.
ethos,
That's
logos.
right.
That's from
That's
John
right.
Dixon.
Yes, it is. It is. Because the way that we make up our worldviews and belief system, it's not just based on pure reason alone. It's also based on the intellect and the will, right? And so, Jonathan Haidt is a great psychologist, a moral psychologist, looking at the way that people make up a lot of their belief systems. And he does show that actually we're far more emotionally and intuitively shaped than we realize. And so we need to have awareness of that. We're not enslaved by it. We can use our reason to inform our emotion and our beliefs. But yeah, we just need to be aware that our emotions really, it's dangerous if we're completely controlled by them, because sometimes they can be misleading.
Okay. We are about to end already this video, Brother Jordan. Wow. Guys, please, everyone here watching, whether you're young or you're middle aged or you're old, I mean, we do this amazing videos here, and hopefully you guys can grasp something from this. Brother Jordan, before we end this wonderful special session we have on Christianity Science, what can you say? What are your closing remarks, brother? What are your last words? I mean, last words as
Yeah.
if I mean closing remarks. Closing remarks.
No, that's fine. Thanks, Carl. Look, I would say I would encourage people to be inquisitive, but also know that you want your questions to lead you somewhere. So as Ravi says, what I believe in my heart must make sense in my mind. So the goal of asking questions is to actually arrive at a point where you make a decision and you actually start living in light of what you believe to be true. So I would say that as you investigate and you think through Christianity and your worldview, it's not actually just something you do in isolation. It's something that's worth having good conversations with people that you respect and trust. So find people that you look up to, mentors, teachers, people who you can ask questions from, and really see if what they say and how they live lines up, if they're worthy of that respect. And then also really, genuinely, stay in the Word. God's Word is life-giving. It's something that exposes our hearts. It's something that gives us hope for the future. It's something that forms us and shapes us. And so please don't just engage in a dry intellectual examination. Actually, Christianity is something that needs to be lived out as well in community, and stay in the Word and pray, and just pray and pray and pray that God would give you understanding and the humility to understand and the will to obey.
Wow. So it always goes back to the cross of Jesus Christ, wherein it is always from Jesus himself who can give us understanding. And now from theism, we have moved now to the Christian God, and now who is Jesus Christ, right? Jesus Christ,
Right.
who's the only one who can mold our lives throughout. And what it's okay if you say that line again of Ravi. What's in your heart must come into your mind.
Yeah, he says, what I believe in my heart must make sense in my mind.
What I believe in my heart must make sense in my mind. That's what he said.
Right.
That's a nice quote. It's my first time to hear that actually. Wow. That's nice.
Yeah.
Once again, guys, thank you, Brother Jordan, for being with us. Actually, this is not the last time or the last invitation. This is one of many more meetings we're gonna have with Brother Jordan here. You will never know when. Could be next month. I'm not sure. Depends on what we're gonna plan ahead, because we also, all of us have busy schedules as well. So let's see what will happen. Well, the Lord will provide for us the time we need, and the Lord will give us the wisdom on what will be the following series we're gonna do. We don't know yet.
No worries.
But
I hope that's been helpful, Carl. Thanks for having me.
Yes, Brother Jordan. And once again, guys, please follow and share our Facebook page, the Fellowship League. Focus more on facts, cross, and discourse. And what we just did today is a wonderful discourse. And this is one of many more guests we're gonna have this following days. The next the next guest will be hosted. The interviewer will be Aaron C. So I won't be there. So I'm not sure. Maybe this weekend I'll be back again. So, we thank you very much, Brother Jordan, for being our brother here. Thank you for being such a great guy. Actually, and I won't just say great. I will not just say great, but you are really blessed by God, bro. And I really
It's
think,
very kind.
yeah, I mean, really thank you a lot as my brother, and also
Yeah.
as a great mentor. I would see you as my mentor so far.
That's very gracious and kind, Carl. And yeah, I hope that it was accessible. And feel free to ask me to do another round in the future if it was scaled down in terms of complexity, if that would be helpful. But nonetheless, I trust that God will have something useful in there for anyone who's watching.
Yes. Well, so far, just to be honest, actually, uh, I had to, focus like more on speakers of RZIM because that's the only that's the only group of speakers I know, and the rest are busy pastoring our church. So,
Yeah.
so they're really busy all as well with. I mean, everyone's busy so far, and
Yeah.
even
It is.
especially in
It
this
is.
especially in this pandemic. So we'll continue to pray. Well, will continue to. We appreciate you being here, Brother Jordan. We'll pray for you. We'll pray for your family as well. We pray for your ministry, and I pray that you'll focus more on the youth. Continue to empower more of the young people. As long as the end has not come yet, I'm not pre-trib. I'm not post-trib. I'm not sure where I am. I am a Christian. Okay, accept that. You reformers out there, reformers. I'm just joking. I mean, um, as
You're a pan-millennialist. Millennialist. Hey, have you heard that?
Wow.
People say I don't know if I'm premillennial or amillennial. I'm pan-millennial.
Oh.
It'll all pan out. It'll all pan out in the end.
Yes. It's
There you go.
It's all flat. Yes.
That's right. It'll all pan out in the end.
Yeah, man. But
All right. Good to be with you, mate.
Good to be with you, brother. And Godspeed and Soli Deo Gloria, brother. And
Indeed.
indeed.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks,
Bye.
brother. God bless.